drinks and food as we go along. Okay. Uh, our YouTube is live here.
Okay.
I will send you the link in case people are shy. There you go. In 4 minutes, we will start. So I'm sending messages to my friends in WhatsApp, yeah?
Yeah.
Abet,
Yeah.
I don't know very much about you actually.
Yeah.
I know. I think you're in the Philippines. I think that's
Yeah.
about all I know.
Yeah. I'm in the Philippines. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños, so it's outside Manila. But prior to that, I used to be an investment banker. Basically, left investment banking back in 2017. Prior to that, I worked with the government with our, ironically, our PPP program, our public-private partnership program. Before that, I was also in corporate. So yeah, so I have a lot of corporate experience, project finance, and that's basically what I do now. Well, have to earn a living somehow, so I'm doing consulting for ironically, again, the likes of ADB and some corporates here who want to engage in large infrastructure projects. So basically, corporate finance background and all of that, but which is, I guess, precisely how I got myself involved in the whole modern monetary theory thing. Because when you work with government and corporate for so long, especially in projects that are supposed to be for development, and they all look so good on paper and all these ideas coming in, but I have to commute whenever I go to work because I have to come here where I live, which is about 70 kilometers from Metro Manila. And you just see that every day, things aren't getting any better. Regardless of how many projects we put in, the public services aren't getting any better. I mean, I guess for the investors, they're working out okay. But well, I guess I don't want to sound like some rabble rouser, but it just doesn't seem to be getting down to the rest of us. And I just felt that, yeah, for all of this fancy theory, all of these things, it's just not working. So there has to be something wrong with it. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's how I found my way eventually into the whole more monetary theory thing.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
and I guess my wife teaches at university, and she has all of this sociology books lying around. And it includes obviously Karl Marx and stuff like that. So reading that stuff,
Uh,
it just gives you a new perspective on the things that you've always thought that these things were natural necessities, and that
yeah,
there's no
that's quite.
other way.
Yeah,
There's no
that's
other
a
way
very
to look at
interesting direction
yeah.
to come from, isn't it? For this, but I mean, well done. I mean, for sort of questioning some
Yeah.
of the, some of the results and so on. You might say of, the profession you're in, I've been in anyway. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, I'm, just while we're waiting for anybody else to come in. I mean, I'd be, so what? How? I just had I mean, I don't know very much at all about Philippines economy, except to note that it's kind of, GDP per capita is quite low, actually quite a lot lower than Indonesia's, where Surya is. So I just wonder what, how do you, question I want to ask you is this, is what's your feeling about the sort of degree of monetary sovereignty,
Yeah.
that exists in Philippines?
Okay. Well, if you listen to to the media whenever they talk about the Philippines in an international manner, is that it's one of the fastest growing, and that's what they always say about developing economies, that they're some of the fastest growing. Uh, but when it comes to monetary sovereignty, I believe we have some degree of monetary sovereignty. But we are very, very reliant on the international market for things like energy. That's one of the things that I guess will dent the type of monetary sovereignty that we have. I have a presentation to show about the current status about national government debt, how it's composed here in the Philippines, how it's grown, especially with the whole COVID-19 thing happening. So I'll put more insight and thoughts in there. But I believe, like most currency issuing governments, we have a certain degree of monetary sovereignty with regards to natural resources, typical of places like this, or say Indonesia. We have a lot of labor. We have a lot of natural resources. Basically, it's nothing like say when they say, if you print that much money, you'll be like Venezuela. No, it's not. I mean, that place like imports 75% of their food. We don't do that. We have a pretty, although a faltering agricultural sector, it's still pretty large and significant, and the natural resources are there if it can be tapped properly. So I believe we have some a significant degree of modern monetary sovereignty that can be tapped. Of course, the whole idea of foreign debt will still have some value in the discourse, especially for places like the Philippines, which is very different if we talk about, say, the UK or the United States. Which is why in the first talk with this with Professor Kabub and Surya, that was one of the things that got me interested in joining this again and presenting some data on our side of the planet. So yeah, I believe we have some monetary sovereignty, and I think it's pretty significant. But yeah, we still have to depend on getting dollar financing for things like, especially I would think for energy most of all.
Right. Yeah. That's quite a big one then. Yeah.
It's 5:03 p.m. Let us start. So good afternoon in Indonesia and Philippines. Going to evening in the Philippines, I believe it's 6 p.m. Yeah, perhaps the sun set at about 7 or so.
It's down already.
All right. And good noon or good late morning to Mike in Dublin, I believe. And today we will talk about today we will talk about dollar and development, privilege or burden. There is this misconception among many people that dollar is actually a privilege. Having dollar as the world's so-called reserve currency is actually a privilege because whoever issues dollars can purchase the world's output, products and services without worry of a deficit. Since I think at least early this decade, or even last decade, some discerning or some critical scholars or academics or thinkers or practitioners have actually seen this, examined this dollar phenomenon and conclude that it is actually no longer a privilege, but instead it has become a burden. But before we start very serious on this, let me show you a video first from my favorite series. Yeah, it's always sunny in Philadelphia. So I think you will enjoy this video. And later I will begin by introducing Mike and Abet as well as myself. Unfortunately, our moderator, I was at his house just now, so he bowled for 1 or 2 hours and he fell ill. And I wanted to bring him to the hospital, but he is afraid of being diagnosed with COVID-19 and having to undergo isolation in the hospital. So he prefers self-isolation at home. So he didn't come out of his room. I was waiting for half an hour to bring him to the hospital, but I guess he prefers to be self-isolating at home with all the pluses and minuses that comes with that decision. So let me start with this uh, clip, yeah? It's called Paddy's Dollar Self-Sustaining Economy from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. If you don't know it, just watch it. This is very funny and very true in a lot of ways. And for those MMT people, you can immediately spot what's wrong with their scheme, yeah? So let's start.
Yeah, I'm really glad we went with the color. Oh, yeah. They pop!
Can you hear the voice?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit more expensive than I would have thought.
Yo, but that's worth it, though. That's an old, poor move. You take your money and you put it into something worth it, you're not tacky. See, by transferring all of our cash into these Paddy's dollars and then printing more of these babies than we ever had in cash, we've upped our value.
Shit. Oh, god damn it. Full-blown shantytown. We're screwed.
Wait a minute. Wait, dude. There could be some real opportunity in this.
Yeah?
Yeah, man. Think about this, dude. In recession times, what thrives more than anything else?
Prostitutes.
No, well, yeah, but that and bars.
Oh, and bars!
Right, because
Well,
people
yeah.
gotta drown their sorrows.
Get drunk.
We own a bar.
Yeah.
So why don't we take these Paddy's dollars and just distribute them amongst the shanties? That
Right.
way.
They buy the booze from us with the dollars.
Right, and then they run out of booze, then they gotta buy more Paddy's dollars from
Thus
us.
creating the self-sustaining economy we've been looking for.
It stimulates our economy. That's what Dave and Buster's does.
Give me one up here.
Boom.
Boom! Who wants some free money, shanties?
Nice doing business with you, huh?
All right,
Cheers,
shanty.
buddy.
Enjoy it.
All right, enjoy yourselves.
Boom!
Okay. Hey,
We
I
did
think
it.
we made every single one of our Paddy's dollars back,
You're
buddy.
damn right. Thus creating the self-sustaining economy we've been looking for.
That's right.
How much fresh cash did we make?
Fresh cash.
Yes.
Well, zero. Zero if you're talking about U.S. currency. People didn't really seem interested in spending any of that.
That's okay. So when they run out of the booze, they'll come back in and they'll have to buy more Paddy's dollars.
Right.
Keeping it moving.
That is assuming, of course, that they will come back here and drink.
They will. They will, because we'll redistribute these to the shanties, thus ensuring them coming back in, keeping the money moving.
Well, no, but if we just redistribute these, then people will continue to drink for free.
Okay.
How does this work, Mac?
The money keeps moving in a circle.
But we don't have any money. All we have is this. How does this work,
I
dude?
don't know. I thought you...
What? I thought you were on top of this.
You're the one that came up with the plan.
Did I come up with this
Last night, dude.
Oh.
With the DMB power card
I
and
blacked out. I blacked out that night.
Shit, dude, I've been following your lead.
Oh, Jesus. Ah, shit.
Okay, so we have no money and no inventory. There's still something we can do. That's still a business somehow.
How does DMBs do it? They got a complicated system worked out, and I cannot begin to understand it.
How does a self-sustaining economy work?
I don't understand how the U.S. economy works, much less some sort of a self-sustaining one. I don't understand how finances work.
So I think you can appreciate, you can understand the difficulties faced by Mac and Dennis in creating a self-sustaining economy. Oh, one moment. Using Paddy's dollars, yeah? Can you spot what's wrong? Why they didn't manage to sustain the currency, Mike? Did you follow the video?
Well, I didn't think there was much of a currency I could even recognize, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, all it was like somebody was offering store tokens. That's what it took me. They store tokens they would have to buy at some future point anyway. I mean, the only sort of slight sort of thing of currency interest that was there, that was maybe, they issued the first set of store tokens for free. But then, it still needs to be sustained. So, okay, I mean, you could set the wheel going, in that direction, but yeah, I mean, so I suppose there's a slight bit of interest there, but I mean, it's a voluntary, redemption of the tokens at the bar. So, there's no tax authority there to sort of, to drive, the use of those particular tokens. That's about all
Exactly.
to be honest.
Exactly. You hit the nails right on its head. So, PADISPAP would have managed to sustain its currency if it requires the user of the currency to pay tax, thereby producing something. Perhaps they can distribute the currency to the people in the buses, in the RVs, to produce beers or to produce drinks. And these people can buy the drinks using the currency that they have gotten from PADISPAP, thus creating the self-sustaining economy. So the main problem, the main weakness was they gave away the money for free, not requiring anyone to work for it. So you hit the nail right on its head, Mike.
Yeah. And I guess because there's no taxation in that particular currency, there's really no demand for that particular currency. There's the idea that you must earn a currency through work or through trade partly has to do with you needing that particular currency in order to do the next to do things of value with them. And the bar is the whole idea of it being a sustainable economy, that is because the bar is just simply not a sovereign entity that has the force of being an instrumentality of society itself. And I guess that's but it does paint a picture about the nature of fiat money, in that sense, that is it just these arbitrary tokens that can be used for valuing things like trade or labor? The idea is there's a little bit more to it than that.
Okay. Thank you very much. So welcome. We have Unggul here. Unggul is an MMT enthusiast, becoming expert from Indonesia. I guess we have your wife or your family there with your last name. And we have my wife, Aprilia. These wives or these women of ours are reluctant to show their faces. It's fine. So we have today a webinar discussing about dollar and development. My wife told me that I was using the wrong poster, but in essence, what we are discussing today is to dispel the myth that only countries in which their currency in large demand by the world can use MMT, can use the MMT paradigm to develop, to create a sustainable and progressive development. So there is a myth that is often surfaced in social media, and the MMT experts are accused of expanding or lengthening or continuing U.S. and other Western countries' imperialism by discovering, by writing, by disseminating the idea of MMT. So this is a very galling development or very galling phenomenon which I wish to dispel. And Mike here is from Dublin. He used to be with Real Progressives, MMT for Real Progressives, and now he is having his own activities. I guess he can introduce himself later. And previously we discussed, Abet introduced himself a bit. He used to be in the, were you in the private or public sector, Abet?
I was in both.
He was in both public and private sector. I guess he's now doing his postgraduate. in the Philippines, and I guess we will share later a bit or a lot about Philippines. So I guess because we don't have a lot of audience here, let's just discuss free flow. I will try to lead the discussion, and because our moderator is sick, so it seems that the three of us will just talk among ourselves, and if Unggul or others later are interested in discussion, they can join us, and they can just simply raise their hand, or they can write on the chat, or they can interrupt us asking whatever they want to ask. And later the audience of our video, they can also write to us. I will write all our contacts in the description, all our works or our writings. Yeah. So the other part, the other point that actually brought me to have you, Mike and Abet, is actually uh, countries, post-colonial countries, or in essence, any country, they don't actually need loans in foreign currency to develop, especially dollars. Yeah? So this is a lie or a practice, a bad practice that has been implemented by governments all around the world, especially in post-colonial countries, and we wonder what's the purpose. So the shocking thing is when Mike posted, or Mike's friends or people in the MMT Facebook groups, yeah, they posted, and later I will show you the video also, that actually US dollar, they seldom, almost never leave the Federal Reserve system or the US system, with the exception of the euro dollars, dollars that are being hit by a lot of European, not only governments, not governments, or Europe, those whose names are in the Panama paper or what have you. I mean, they hit the dollars in places which can hide their money. So these are invisible, yeah. So perhaps that is outside of the U.S. system, perhaps, but I don't think so also. So Buddy Wells, our friend from South Africa, he's explained that when South Africa recently borrowed from the IMF US dollars, what happened was, so the account of the South African bank at the Federal Reserve in the United States were accredited, or credited, sorry, not accredited, credited with that amount, and the South African bank in South Africa, they just convert that amount to South African rand, and they use the rand to fund it, to fund their whatever they need, to fund their programs for development. So the question is, why go the roundabout way of creating money, borrowing in dollars, and then converting that dollars internally in your own central bank to your own currency, and then use your own currency to develop or to conduct your programs? Why not just create your own currency in whichever means allowed, yeah, by the regulation in your country, so that first of all you can increase your monetary sovereignty. Second of all, you really don't have to worry about paying back these loans. So Buddy said that unless the US dollar loan are used to pay for past loans, because past loans, perhaps the interest rate were higher than the current loan, because at the moment the interest rate is very low everywhere because of the pandemic. So that's one purpose where the dollar loan now from post-colonial countries can be forgiven or is acceptable. So that's one purpose. So you pay off the foreign loan previously made or previously conducted by foreign or even current governments. Second purpose is if it's an emergency. If you really need dollars to import food, basic staples, energy, and all that, so you can use this loan. But that is not the case for South Africa, and I think for Indonesia, and even for the Philippines. We do not need dollars for these basic needs, except perhaps, as Abet say, for energy. Yeah, but even then, we are better off, like Father Kabo often say, to develop our own green renewable energy instead of continuing to borrow these dollars into our economy. So I will continue with this. Even for the US, the fact that the US has dollars as reserve currency, world's reserve currency, is actually not beneficial to the US. So I will share my screen and I will show you the works of Michael Patricia. I tagged him on Twitter. I mentioned him, but I think wait until we become superstars, and perhaps all these people will start joining us for our webinars. Yeah. So he said that in 2011, you can see here an exorbitant burden. Yeah. So dollar has always been perceived as an exorbitant privilege, precisely because the United States need not worry about deficits. They can purchase the world's products and services with dollars, including energy, electronics, and what have you, without worrying at all about their deficit. And here, you can see this is in 2014, just not in 2011. Are we starting to see why it's really the exorbitant burden? The role of the US dollar as the world's global reserve currency has been regarded as a great advantage to the United States, but actually it is a destabilizing burden rather than an exorbitant privilege. In a moment, I will explain to you why, because I've read all of Patty's work and I think I understood it, and I had a Twitter conversation with him, and I think he understands that I understood his work. And this is one of the latest one by The Phenomenal World, yeah, The Dollar and the Empire. That's the title, and this is one of the latest work saying that actually having the dollar at the moment for the US itself is not good in a manner that they're doing it at the moment. So let me explain to you why it is bad. So first of all, we know that the US has a really huge current account deficit. What current account deficit means, your imports exceeds your exports, and your net inflow of money exceeds the your net outflow of money exceeds your net inflow of money in your currency. So what does that mean? That means products and services are being produced outside of the US. What does this imply? The US is no longer the creator, the maker of products and services. What does that mean? Meaning unemployment. Why? After agriculture, manufacturing is the second largest, or at least in the top 3 or 5, yeah, employer, the manufacturing sector. Having manufactured products produced outside of the US means that these manufacturing plants will have to reduce and even close their plants, their factories, because they are no longer needed. So this is what drives the rate of unemployment in the US, because these workers no longer have any place to work. You know, there are only so much service sector or non-manufacturing sector that can absorb all these workers. Not to mention the benefits, you know, that was afforded by this manufacturing sector in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and to some extent in the 80s. So the US manufacturing sector really started to hollow out in the 90s when Clinton and the Chinese government, when the US government under Clinton, you know, they made a deal. But they actually started earlier from Nixon, I think, onwards. You know, they wanted to contain communism softly. But in the 90s, it really speeded up. So the US capitalist class, the US top class, wanted to enter the Chinese market, and the Chinese said, "Okay, you can do that, but with some restrictions, some requirements. First of all, you have to open your factories in China. Second of all, you have to use our workers to build whatever products that is being produced in the factories." So that was the start of the hollowing of the US manufacturing base. And we can see at the moment, lots of US citizens are very angry because they have previously good jobs in these factories, but at the moment they don't have jobs, and that's why you see the U.S. chooses leaders who made empty promises about bringing jobs back into the U.S., but which hasn't materialized until now. So, so this is why if any country with uh, how do you say that, which are in demand by the world, any countries such as the US, if they don't use it to increase or to ensure full employment first and foremost in their own country, whatever the result is, whatever the outcome will actually be bad for their country. So that's what we see in the US. And China at the moment, due to its huge population, realizes this. Contrary to many people's thinking, they actually don't mind with the US having this status of dollar as global reserve currency. They don't care about that. What they want to do is to continue moving higher up the value chain, to create more factories. And at the moment, they are focusing very much on next generation technologies such as artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and what have you. But first and foremost, they don't want to leave the basic industries, the industries that can employ a lot of people. But this is, I'm talking about macro perspective here. There are lots of bad going on in China also, but I'm talking about the macro perspective, how the Chinese are trying to increase its industrial capability without leaving what they have behind. So this was in opposition to what the US did. So they wanted to increase their capability, but they left the base. They left the really, really basic industries which can employ a lot of people. So that's what I'm beginning with, and I think Abet can continue sharing the Philippines experience or whatever he has for this webinar. Yeah. So please, on to you, Abet. Thank you very much.
Okay. I guess I'm not going to give too much, too many opinions with regards to the economy of the U.S. But the idea of dollars, of their monetary sovereignty, still rests in the idea that most international trade still use the US dollar for the interaction of international trade. Now, I've seen some, even in forums, they're going on with news that the dollar is losing its value, that it's doing this and that, and its days are numbered. I'm pretty skeptical about things that point out to that degree. And yeah, the a lot of the misery that they have there has to do mostly with shifting their attentions more on finance rather than actual manufacturing economic activity. Profits still come in. It just doesn't matter to them if it's coming in and through their own workers, and it really doesn't matter to to a financial where his money is coming in. It just has to. So on that side, I'd like to share
Let me let
our
me make you a
experience.
co-host. Yeah.
Sure.
Go on. Yeah. Go on.
Okay. So now I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. I'm going to. Wait. Okay. Here we go. Okay. This is very short. Can you see the screens?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me go. Okay. Basically, from what I gathered from when we were going to do this, it has we're going to discuss things that regards to the effect or the relationship between dollars, or in our case, basically any FX kinds of liabilities, and our economy. Now, since I did not have the time to research the whole thing for let's say looking back at the whole history of the Philippines and all of that, I'm just going to focus on the last few months, which is basically the COVID months, this time of plague. Okay, the Philippines has a long history with multilaterals. During the after the EDSA revolution of 1986, and even before that, we already had relations with the likes of the World Bank and the IMF, and even the Asian Development Bank actually have their headquarters here in Manila. So we have a long and colorful history with them giving us loans, assistance, and the infamous SAP days when they did structural adjustment programs, which are basically loans that came with conditions like, okay, we're going to give you this much money, but you'll have to do these kinds of policies. Always came with all sorts of strings. So they had, how should I say this? They have a varying and a pretty lasting effect on the way that the Philippine economy has been structured. There have been lots of studies that went on say that they have effects not just on the way we were industrializing, but we also had effects regarding how our education system worked, given how deeply the Philippine bureaucracies, administrations were pretty much very into this whole new liberal system of development that began, I guess, in the 1980s. Um, and of course our colonial history with the United States directly. So that explains that. And so we have a long history with regards to um, multilateral debt. Now, I'm showing here the profile of our national government debt. And this comes directly from the Bureau of Treasury. So I'm going to go straight here to 2020. Obviously, it's not yet done, and they have records for August. The thing that might be scary for especially the people who aren't too versed on MMT is this number. 24.4% increase in outstanding government debt just this year, when the years before it was running from 1, 3, and so on and so forth. Now, 24%, that's like one fourth. That looks pretty high. So if you are afraid of, say, deficit spending and think that, oh my God, how are we going to pay all of this back? That looks like a shocking number. Now, for the domestic part, it grew about 30.9%, about 31%, almost a third of it. And for the external part, I'm going to put it here at 16.8% until August. Now, these, especially the local number, that looks pretty scary when you look at it from a conventional economic point of view, that whatever you borrow, you have to pay back. So we're like burdening the current generation, the future generations for this. But this shouldn't be so dramatic given that a lot of deficit spending had to happen because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There were lots of new outlays that had to be made that would not have been made in the likes of 2019 because the conditions are simply so different. So that's one thing. But the FX increase here is 30.9 from before we were doing these ones. The thing also that have to be noted that in the past few years, the government here has had this big infrastructure push program, and that will require a lot of, well, according to them, that will require a lot of foreign borrowing. So at the moment, this is just a snapshot of it. Down here, we go down here to the 49.3. This is the national government debt divided by GDP. Well, the GDP I had to estimate. We don't have the numbers in for that yet. So for this case, the easiest way that I did it was just what if the full year GDP of the country for this year will be exactly equal to the GDP last year. Chances are probably might even be smaller, even in a nominal sense, given that GDP growth this year is expected to be negative. We are in a recession. So given that, again, another scary looking number, looks like it's 50%. So 50% of our national debt, the gross size of it is 50% of our gross output. that sounds really, really scary. But given the whole MMT perspective, it really shouldn't be. I'll show you why. Now, our domestic external debt is 30% out of our total debt. So about 70-30. And any portfolio manager in his mind will say, yeah, but that's a good mix. And there's a reasoning to some finance managers in government always claiming that it's not, this kind of situation isn't so bad. But the thing about that is they use arguments like we need to keep borrowing, or we have to be active in the international financial markets in order to gain access to it in the future. I guess in a corporate sense, that should make sense if I were managing, say, HSBC or Citibank. Uh, Personally, I have my doubts that that should be how you should manage a currency issuing state. But well, it is what it is right now. Looking at the components of our external debt, around 43% of it is in the form of loans. And these comprise mostly of loans coming from the multilaterals, your World Bank, your ADB, and even the new Chinese Development Bank, AIIB. 57 comes in the form of securities. Those are basically senior debt in the form of bonds. So basically, we can look at it that 57% comes from financial markets, while 43% come from development agencies, more or less, more or less. This is basically a snapshot of the kind of external debt that we have, and many of the commentators will go that this is somehow necessary as a way to mix liabilities. And again, I will argue that that is a concept that is more akin to managing a portfolio, say, of a bank or a private institution, than it is to manage a portfolio of a sovereign currency issuing state, because of the easy fact that even that banks and corporations are not currency issuers, they're currency users. So there's a distinct difference in why they should be managed. So, but I'm just explaining that that's likely the reasoning I get from people I talk to with regards to debt mix. Now, debt to GDP. Now, debt to GDP is one of those measures that are very like GDP itself, GDP growth and all that. This is one of the measures that have been always being bandied about uh, to, I guess, and even I guess the likes of the Moody's, the S&Ps, the ones who are doing credit ratings for countries will look at this um, what do you call this ratio as some sort of measure of the debt capacity of a country. And for developing countries like the Philippines, credit ratings do matter because I guess whether we like it or not, we will always have some need for foreign currency because of our import dependence. So this is one of the factors that they're looking at always, the gross debt divided by the GDP. Although personally, I find this measure very hard to wrap around my head around on, because in corporate finance they will usually use, for numbers or ratios to have meaning, they should have some they should be able to communicate something like solvency. Those are two balance sheet, two stock items that you use to compare to each other to see if you have to see the ratio of whether you can actually service your obligations in the coming period. So that's both stock items. Now, if you're talking about debt in corporate finance parlance, you have coverage ratios where you have a certain amount of cash flow divided by the assumed amount of debt that you're supposed to be paying. So anything below one of that will have get you as already a red flag. Debt to GDP is a very strange metric because I don't exactly know what it's communicating. Debt is a stock item, GDP is a flow item. Is it really saying that we can basically, if you get here at 49.3%, are we then saying that if we use all our production to pay off the debt, we'll have to use half our production? Um, I can't see the meaning in that. I'm trying to. What does it mean? Especially when you look at the likes of Japan, whose debt to GDP ratios are like 2.7 times. Does that mean Japan is supposed to be underwater by now? And we obviously know that it isn't. So it's one of those things about these metrics that are it's just really puzzling to me why we're looking at it in this way. But at the moment, even the media stuff coming out from the government here keep saying that, yeah, we still have a lot of space because our debt to GDP is less than 50%. So what happens now if it gets to 50%? What do we do? Do we stop? Do we I am just very skeptical about the use of this ratio altogether. So yeah, I can't find too much meaning in that. Anyway, so but at least now we have a pretty good picture about the external debt of the Philippines. Debt to GDP is about 50%. We're talking about a total of how much is this? 9.6 trillion US. That's about around 200, about 198 billion US dollars. This 9.6 trillion pesos is about 198 billion US. So that's how much we owe. And oh, sorry, go back. And at the moment in August, we owe our foreign creditors about 60 billion US. Now, what was the response of the Philippine government? Well, here is a list coming in from our Department of Finance. And these are labeled as financing agreements that we took in response, particularly to the COVID-19. So we can see here that the signing dates, except for this one, all of them have happened after March, after the Philippines closed down during the start of our lockdowns in March in response to COVID. So all in all, we can go to the bottom. All in all, that totals about 10 billion US. Now, the question that has to come here, and it's in relation to what Surya was saying earlier, was that why do we actually need to get foreign financing when we can literally issue our own currency if the objective is to mobilize resources within your borders? Should come as no surprise that that should be possible because the people who will work here will accept Philippine pesos. The retailers here who will, where we are going to possibly buy food for the people who need them, will also accept Philippine pesos. So why do we need this? One thing I forgot. Prior to this, the Philippine government, through our central bank, got a loan, literally, I think, very, very quickly in April, amounting to about 300 billion pesos, and that's about 6 billion US. And that's in pesos. That's 300 billion, and that's a lot. And it was done fairly quickly. It helped in mobilizing those assets, those what do you call this, services and products during a time when the economy will bog down. COVID is a very unique kind of disaster because what it does is it stops people from working. The idea that everybody can work from home is pretty ridiculous, especially in when a lot of your economy requires so much labor intensive products. I know that there've been discussions about AI coming, and then we're probably going to go. I don't believe it's going to happen anytime soon, at least here. The point that is that we need the social safety nets, especially during times like this, which should explain why the debt burden of the government increased by about 25% during this time. There is a rationale to that, which I believe is a pretty good reason all by itself. But if we focus on the dollar or the FX types of loans, which is about 10 billion starting from January all the way to August, the idea is why do we need them and why do we need them to be in dollars? And I guess that's the critical question. Why do we need dollar financing? So to do this, we look into the no, the loan agreements themselves, because they will show what they're supposedly for. Now, this is a sample that I took from that list, and they will include these loans that have information in them. Now, for bonds, of course, they don't have these very specific covenants to them. Very different from the loans that are taken from multilaterals. So the first one, about 1.5 billion US from ADB. This particular loan actually has four components, two of which are in euros, two of which are in US dollars. They're priced using LIBOR or Euribor with a slight spread. Usually, as loans of these kinds are, will have a lower interest rate than what you can get in the market. They're supposed to be concessionary, because otherwise, why don't you just go and get bonds? So these are concessional loans. Now, the thing with loans from multilaterals is that they have to fund something pretty specific. In some cases, they fund projects. In some cases, they fund programs. Here, this is the purpose: to combat the spread of the pandemic, for social protection and relief to affected people, and to mitigate shocks in the economy. Now, there aren't too many details in that loan agreement, but you can see, but from the look of it, there doesn't seem to be a large component in that I can attribute to anything being imported. Probably you can, maybe they'll need some medicine, some of the PPEs, although I know that we do produce PPEs locally. But a lot of it has to do with social protection. And social protection will come in the form, usually, here in the Philippines, the way the programs are done, with direct cash transfers. Now, why would we need US dollars to do that? It's not like we're transferring US dollars to poor and needy people. I mean, what are they going to do with it? So, if we do look into the loan agreement, it says there that these the US dollars that will be drawn down will indeed be converted. They call it counterpart funds. They will be converted, and that will be monitored. But you are the liability, the nature of the liability will be in this currency. And that means you have to pay it back in this currency. So you'll have to generate that again. Okay, so this is one example, the ADB one. The other one is their counterpart from AIIB, 750 million US, same premise. The next one is another one from ADB that came in June, 21 years, LIBOR plus spread. This one is for educational grants and participating beneficiaries and entitled under the 4Ps. Now, the 4Ps is a cash transfer program for marginalized individuals. So again, just by looking at this, education grants or scholarships, beneficiaries under 4Ps, these look like peso denominated expenses to me. I don't know why we needed, I don't understand why we need to get 500 million US from ADB in order to fund this. Next one is for competitive and inclusive agriculture, again from the ADB. Purpose is implementation of agricultural trade policy, public services and finance to the farmers, social protection of rural families. Now, I guess maybe some of this will require buying imported machinery, but looking at public services, finance to agriculture sector, social protection of families, social protection, again, that word again comes up. These are direct fiscal incentives in one way or the other, and this is most likely going to be denominated in pesos. So again, why did we take this in this form? The last one is from World Bank, COVID-19 response, 500 million US, mitigating economic impact on poor families and financial relief to small businesses. Again, these are literally cash transfers that will be undertaken in Philippine pesos. And when you do this, you're basically getting an FX related liability in order to finance expenditures in your own currency. Now, these examples alone, as I said, a total of that in the list of the Department of Finance about $10 billion. This is already 3.6, about 3.7 billion. So this is almost 40% of that amount. And from the information that we can gather on them, there doesn't seem to be any necessary need for these things to be in foreign currency. There doesn't seem to be a need for them to be in foreign currency. Probably, as is typical with loan agreements for this, is that there are technical assistance coming in from foreign consultants. Sure, and those will probably be in US, but I really doubt that they're on the 500 million to the 1.5 billion mark, such that for almost 40% of that portfolio of loans was needed in order to mitigate economic impact on poor families and financial relief for small businesses who are all, well, peso dependent. So these are just some of my views. Around 10 billion. It's procured in FX denominated terms. Now, while the actual amount of FX-related expenditures in that 10 billion is not as certain, so I will not make a claim that all of them are like that. But it seems to be that a large part of it are going to be used for peso-denominated expenditures. And one thing that needs to be pretty obvious for the governments of places like the Philippines and I guess Indonesia in the coming months or years, coming next year, is that we are definitely going to need some FX-related liability. We're going to have to enter into one of these eventually. For instance, the purchase of millions of potentially efficient vaccine. Those will be imported. That, for the Philippines, that is for sure. So the idea is, if we are indeed, if we look at the whole debt portfolio right now, the main reasoning for a lot will be because we have to keep our relations with these financiers going. We have to stay visible in the financial markets. But again, I believe that's the reasoning of a portfolio manager who works for a corporate for a corporate institution, not one looking at the fiscal needs of a nation, of a sovereign currency issuing nation. We will need to borrow in dollars. That is for sure. The only issue I have is, did we need to borrow 10 billion for this? We have already shown in April that we can raise 6 billion at almost a drop of the hat. And all of that is in pesos. And it's not like, what's the and I guess I keep asking this because I don't know all of the laws regarding the relationship about our central bank and our national government. But if you really do think of it, can the central bank say no? And what we're talking about, even if you say that these loans, the ones coming from ADB, the ones coming from World Bank, they come in concessional terms. They have very low interest rates, but you can't deny that they have inherent FX risks and default risks. Because even if you're a sovereign currency issuing nation, if you go into a liability for US dollars, a currency that you cannot produce, you will have to produce that currency outside of that power. Therefore, you have a real default risk, which is very different if you just issue bonds in pesos that will be bought by your central bank. Again, that was asked to me by a colleague before. Okay, so the government can issue bonds during the pandemic. Who's going to buy them? The central bank will. And they did. About $6 billion worth. We can do that. So it's just a pretty, I guess a lot of the reason was to say, yeah, but that's just 10 billion. And most of our financing is in doing local debt, which are basically default-free and FX risk-free. But the point is, during a time when we are dealing with a pandemic, when our dollar earning capabilities at the moment, in the short term at least, is hamstrung. A lot of our foreign workers who gave us remittances have come home. Our tourism industry is in the dumps. Just today, I saw the news that our exports are down 20%. And other than that, these three are our sources of dollars. And these three are basically our sources of dollars that will eventually pay for this, unless you want us to buy it in the spot market or go into another debt to refinance them. But the point is, why are we taking in dollar denominated liabilities at a time when our short-term dollar generating abilities are obviously very weak? That's one point. Second, we are going to need that ability to borrow again, and probably fairly soon in the next months or years. Wouldn't it be good if we saved it for that instead of going into this? I mean, we're already deep enough in debt already. Why do we need the point is, why are we taking an incremental FX and default risks for things that can be funded without having to do that? That is the point. You have an alternative to that. Why are we doing it? Because we will need to do that sometime in the future. So, in that sense, I'm not really, how should I say this? I'm not totally against the whole idea of foreign debt. In places like the Philippines, where monetary sovereignty is not absolute, not probably not even close, but we have a significant amount of it. The idea is that probably we should be saving our capacity for stuff like this, for things when we really, really need it. And so in that sense, the way I look at it right now is we're 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 simply just doing this in the same way. Again, in the whole MMT framework, the thing that they keep saying is that uh, the one of the main lessons that I got from them is that a sovereign currency issuing state is nothing like a corporation. What this shows to me is that don't we don't see it that way. We're trying to run our finances using diversification models that are taken generally from literal finance textbooks. We're looking at generating relationships in the same way that we're trying to do relationships in the corporate sector. Um, and I believe that it's really pretty it's limiting what the state can do, especially in times like this when we need the ability of the state to mobilize resources that the market can't, because the market is really on its knees right now. We can't depend on the market right now. And as COVID has seen, the market itself is very fragile. To assume that you can depend on it for everything all of the time is pretty limiting to what a sovereign state can do. And the hegemony of that kind of thinking, while I guess on paper it sounds harmless, it can be downright fatal in times like these. So while it can be argued that no, not all of our debts are coming in from dollars, the fact that we're still taking a lot of it, as we have seen, 16% increase this year when the rest of the years they were below 10. It uh, it just boggles the mind. Why do we need to do this when we have alternatives? And I guess that's the one of the basic messages of MPs, that there is an alternative to this. We are not wedded to this system. While it exists, isn't the only system that can. And there has to be a way to get through that hegemonic type of thinking because again, if there's anything that the COVID crisis, this plague has shown us, is that at times like this is the time when society needs its instrumentalities to be at its most effective. And it can be if they understood the idea of how to use their sovereign currencies more effectively. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Abet. Very precise presentation. I love it. So you made your points with proof, yeah? I hope you can share your PDF or you share it right now in the chat, or you can send it to me through Facebook or email or Twitter so that we upload it to the video description later. Mike, before you continue, I would like to share with the audience here. We have Pak Budi Sunulingga just joining us. He's a regional expert on regional development, yeah? So I would like to share uh, what brought us to the current webinar. So let me show my screen and also to continue a lot of Abet's points here. Here, we have a human uh, who I referred to earlier, saying that the US dollar never leave the US financial system. Yeah? In the United States, let's see.
China's getting paid $100 bills, giant suitcases of $100 bills back in 747 over to China, hiding the money there so people don't have money. That's not the way it works. What happens when Walmart wants to buy $1 million worth of Chinese-made goods is the Chinese have some Chinese company has an account at Citibank, has an account at Citibank. Walmart has an account at Citibank. Walmart instructs Citibank to move $1 million from its account to the Chinese account. The money's still in Citibank. Hasn't done it in New York. The total amount of deposits in the U.S. financial system is absolutely unchanged. It's just the ownership has changed. If China decides to buy a corporate bond, then now somebody sells the corporate bond to them, has the money, same amount of deposits, and it's in different banking centers. It's still got to be an American bank. It's just literally not possible to move money underneath the U.S. financial system as long as we have currency in our own currency. Some of the countries have gotten into trouble. They've gotten into trouble because they're financing in a different currency, and that really becomes problematic. And this problem really happens. They have not quite figured this out because nations are borrowing in a currency that is really not their own. The currency is a shared currency that from individual central banks, and they're going to continue to have problems. My wife Liz has never liked the euro quite frankly. She was right all along. It took me a while to figure it out. So when people have dollars, a country owns dollars because they have international trade surplus with the U.S. What can they do with the money? Well, they can buy U.S. goods and services. That's what we're talking about. We're talking this morning about one of the services they can buy is education services, which is fine. Or they can invest in U.S. dollar assets. That's it. They can also sell the dollars to somebody else, but then if somebody else has those two options, that's all you can do with the money. There isn't any other option.
So I would add the disadvantage, the burden, that the exorbitant burden is actually what happened in the late 80s and the early 90s, you know, the Japanese had excess US dollars and they went on a spending spree in the US, buying properties, you know, and that gave way to a lot of nationalistic sentiment even then, such that Michael Crichton, he wrote a novel called Rising Sun, focuses on that you know the anti-Japan sentiment because the Japanese were buying American properties with the U.S. dollars they obtained from exporting their electronics or other goods to the U.S. So they had to recycle it by buying on U.S. soil. So I see that Unggul Purnamo Aji raised his hand. I still have lots of things to show here, but perhaps you can share your Mike. I hope you are patient. Let's hear from Unggul first. Unggul, please.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just 1 or 2 minutes, I guess. Actually, something that I want to say is like the previous video that you've explained to us. It means when we see the another sector, yeah, just letting that there's a yes sector and non-yes sectors. When they hold a dollar, so the only thing that they can do is just importing something from the dollar or just something by us and so forth to the US to drain their dollar. Even though they try to change it to treasury bill, it doesn't matter. They should import, as a fundamental understanding, to drain the US dollar. Or when a country has indebtedness for US dollar, it means that it's not its own currency. When the problem when US dollar doesn't want to be a buyer of last resort, they should obtain more debt and debt in order just to pay their debt. And in the end of it, is going to the Ponzi scam. And of course, the situation that is so awful, and in the previous, same with the previous, in the first idea, when the US doesn't want to export, this problem because you hold something that not your currency is not your tax credit. It means you hold the worthless paper, and what we want to do? Of course, when for example, US dollar want to stop all of the export and imports, something that the holder of US dollar on the country that hold the debt to US dollar, they should do money speculation just for ending up the US dollar. But the problem, the US dollar is still outside of the system itself. So of course, doing something alternative such as BRICS is good for some extent, and also perhaps I just want to say that in the international market, in the international trade, international economy, holding the US dollar is something like that is not really desirable because we give up our sovereignty in our currency, and there's no benefit for the holder and for the debitors of US dollar itself. So I think that's my just.
So Unggul, if I may ask, why do you think the Indonesian government borrowed or requested a loan from the World Bank, IMF, or other multilateral, or even perhaps asking for diaspora money in dollars? Why do you think is that at the moment?
Yeah, when you look at the description of money in BI, Central Bank of Indonesia, you will see that the description of money is just something to exchange. It's not tax credit, right? So because they think that government is like same like household, they need to obtain something in order to spend. So it is actually fraud at all. And moreover, when I'm learning a lot of things through all of the universities in Indonesia, there is no curriculum about MMT. They say that printing money just causes inflation, but they forget the fact that the inflation, for example, in Southeast Asia in 1997 or in Mexico, because of taking currency to US dollar, or when you look at the Weimar Republic, or when you look at Zimbabwe, they have, because of their supply sectors, had broken, and printing the money, of course, causing inflation actually, and having foreign debt in Weimar Republic, for example, is totally awful, just causing the default. But they forget the story of German economic miracle about how to cancel the debt, how to revive the economy once again. Since all of the universities here just explaining something based on treatment, based on rational expectation, based on market clearing equilibrium, and something that is shit like that. So we have no proposal, moreover, for pursuing the improvement in our country. Moreover, when we are nullifying the role of the government, so economy is always planned. So the question is, who plans the economy? Five sectors now in Indonesia. We are gonna be like US in the 2007, but still we are still growing to go to the deflation. There's something that happening here.
So at the moment, it seems that you and I and several other people, less than 10, understands MMT in Indonesia. So we have a mountain to climb in terms of disseminating accurate information about MMT. And I see that you have tried to engage, with economists, elites inside the government, and also their critics. You see, so it's funny. So the government economists, the mainstream economists, and their critics, they both argue, and we're trying to mediate them. We're trying to direct them to the proper understanding, but they refuse outright. So
Yeah.
it's just funny to me. Okay.
But they know the truth, maybe they will not never apply this MMT because there's the interest of their constituencies to, nullifying the role of the government because, the oligarchies here want to plan the economy because, without applying the MMT, the wealth will be sucked up to just 1% of society. That's the question, right? They have the constituencies that prohibiting us, for example, for applying MMT.
Thank you very much. So let me continue with what I wanted to show. So this webinar really was a lot of time in the making. And this is one of the reignition, of why I wanted to have this webinar. So Abet here said, why is funding, as he has made his points in this presentation, why is funding peso cash transfers to dollar-denominated liabilities supposed to make sense? So Abet, you can see here, you only have 3 comments, and that's by me. So really, we are being ignored by everyone. Yeah. And here we have Mike, who explained in modern monetary theory for real progressives. Yeah, this is also I think this year or some time back. So let's see. Okay. So here, I've read comments from time to time that dollars never leave our banking system. It's just digital keystrokes, moving amounts on a ledger into different entry headings. Okay, double entry accounting. So blah blah blah. And then Mike said that essentially he said that no such thing as currency conversion. It's a trade. So later, Mike, you can explain about this, yeah? Because I was saying this might was a conversion. So later, after these few windows are closed, then you can explain later. Any bank that operates accounts denominated in US dollars operates under the US Federal Reserve System and must have an account at the Fed. Hence, it is fair to say no dollar leaves US jurisdiction ultimately. So ultimately there, do you mean that it left the US system and then come back? Because you used the word ultimately there, yeah? So let's continue here. You see, MMT developing country. You don't need the country, just MMT developing. This is, if you look, this is the latest, yeah? If you look, you see, you will have people like this saying that developed nations can run deficits and enjoy endless cheap imports. Developing nations need to export in order to import. Okay, so running deficit to import, actually, I know that Mosler said, this is positive, yeah. But in real terms, meaning that if you import, that means your country does not produce what you're importing. If you have the capability, if you have the raw materials, if you have the people, if you have the tools to produce that, that means you are foregoing a chance to have full employment in your country. So that's where the negative of having your currency as a world or as a currency that is being traded highly at the world's market. See? So it is no longer for a long time, since the 2000s, dollars not is not a does not have an exorbitant privilege but burden. Yeah, you can see this so many times repeated. Yeah, good because having a world reserve currency status is good because you can import, but that is actually no longer beneficial because you are no longer producing. You're no longer making full use of all the resources available in your country. And here to confirm or to make Abet's point, yeah, to provide additional proof that I wrote for the Jakarta Post, we wrote for the Jakarta Post, and here we say that in economics, as a social science, because there's some critique that a lot of U.S. leading economists are saying MMT idea are bad, So I say to them that truth is not determined by consensus. Truth is determined by reality in social science, in science in general. So we have the empirical proof at the moment that the practice of Indonesia, the practice of the Philippines, the practice of the UK, of so-called central bank buying their own government bond has not led to inflation, has not led to, we have not seen signs that increased government bond purchases have damaged central bank credibility in India, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Inflation and interest rates have not picked up in these economies, and exchange rate changes have been modest so far. So you can see here, this is the original article, but actually this article is actually critical of this policy, but they cannot argue against the evidence, These are practitioners, Their livelihood is whether something is true or not, because they bet, unlike academics, they bet their life on it. So they cannot argue against evidence. So no matter how much, you see, the title is EM Central Bank's Risk Reputation with Bond Buying Program. So risk is a conditional word, and you can find that all of the article is full of if, might, would, not would, if, might, may, but the only conclusive thing here is what I just showed you just now. In the case of, let's see, we have not seen that increase. This is what I checked the source. Yeah, this is what I read just now. So this is the only conclusive statement. The others are, could reflect, let's see, if or might. See, might lead. So this might not lead. It might lead. It might not lead. Yeah. So that's one. And Prof. Scott Fulweiler and Jesus Felipe, they have a lot of presentations recently this year. This is organization of Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, and this is at this is same presentation, but this is at ADB website, whereas this is at OMF-IF website. Yeah, demystifying government deficits. But what I wanted to show you is not here. What I wanted to show you is here. This is government deficit and central bank financing in the COVID-19 era, but evil or blessing in disguise. Yeah, this is May 2020. So, like Abet said, it's fine, it's okay to borrow in foreign currency, but not willy-nilly. There are some requirements, or there are some necessary needs. There are some necessities to do that, not only willy-nilly. So we have it here. I presented this in front of the Indonesia's former national planning minister and the current rector of Perbanas. Yeah, here Philippines mentioned. Let's see where is the statement? Yeah. Let's see. Let me. Okay, maybe it's here. Obviously. Perception. It's a table. I remember it's a table. What the table says is, it is fine to borrow US dollars, but this is the purpose. As we see, as Abet has presented, currently the government is not borrowing US dollar for the right purpose. I told you the purpose just now was to repay former debt, or to really critical imports, energy and such, or like Unggul said, you can actually renegotiate, whether to cancel, to to postpone or to convert the debt. Like previously, Indonesian economist Rizal Ramli, he converted the debt into forest sustainable programs. So utang ke utan, debt to nature. So that was his. Never mind, we can find it later. So I would like to draw your attention to ADB website, yeah, COVID-19policy.adb.org, and you can see the analysis. Basically, this is full-blown MMT, but they are consultants. They are advisory role. They are not what do you call that? They are not the actual leaders of these institutions. Yeah. So uh, uh, you know, as we often read, the our writing does not reflect, our institution, which is the case. ADB still loans a high amount of money to the Philippines, Indonesia, and to other countries. So is the World Bank analysis. So you can see an analysis, reasons not to fear. I believe this is in Business Times. But can you see my screen? You can, right? Okay. And you see here. Okay, so you have 6 here. So I guess now we can continue with Mike. Mike, perhaps you can explain, elaborate on your points, and respond to whatever have been described in our webinar so far. Over to you, Mike. Let me stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much. I'm afraid I'm not sure I followed much of that, Surya. I couldn't hear terribly well. So I'll leave that aside a little bit. But I must say thank you very much to Abet Mercado for your for your presentation there. Yeah, that was really very interesting. I mean, it highlights. I think the issue for a lot of developing countries, doesn't it? I mean, you must know this, and I think we both know the answer to the question that you posed, but I'm not sure really whether I want to go too far into the sort of, the questionable practices that involves in public with you. I don't know whether that's necessarily a good thing to be doing. But I think, there's no, let's just look at the technicalities of it. There's no reason for the Philippines government to be borrowing dollars, to purchase real resources, labor and real resources that are made in the Philippines, that are produced in the Philippines. There's no technical reason. I mean, the only reason that I can speculate on is that somebody there in the Philippine government or their buddies wanted some hard currency in exchange for pesos, and that's a nice little roundabout, money go round of saying, I'm rich in pesos, and how can I be rich in dollars? Oh, here's a good idea. So anyway, okay, I won't go too far into that, but I think it's pretty obvious that that's what's going on, and it's going on not just in the Philippines, to my perspective, but it's going on in developing countries.
Can I ask Mike?
Sure,
I ask? Yeah. Do you think the U.S. or Western government are putting pressure on countries such as Philippines or Indonesia or South Africa to borrow in U.S. dollars?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, I would say they probably are. But I think that's, it's just I don't know whether there's more pressure coming from there than there would be from individuals in developing countries, individuals I'm talking about individuals in positions of power and influence in those countries. And beyond that, I really, I don't know, but I'd say it's a pretty two-sided affair, to be honest. There's benefits for both sides, isn't there? For those influential, powerful people I'm talking about. I mean, the ordinary people of developed countries really know very little about any of this, if anything at all. So, I think I just want to move on. Thanks very much, Abet. That's really very interesting to see that in black and white what is going on. And yeah, I'm pretty horrified by that. And I must say, you know, sitting here in comfortable Ireland. You know, I really, you know, that's not what I want to see. So look, but I just want to really just mention a couple of things here, that general principles. I don't really know. I can see Abet's a very, you know, quite an advanced person. I mean, Abet's much more knowledgeable than I am, indeed, in terms of sort of, you know, financial matters, international finance, and so on. I'm not in any way qualified in that area. I don't know who the rest of the audience are exactly. But I think a sort of point about MMT is that MMT shows that it's really putting some flesh on the idea, if you like. There's a very basic idea where all this starts from, is that money is created from nothing. It relates to no barter system. It's something we create from nothing. It's a debt obligation, if you will. And that really, in terms of, you know, the focus we should be starting with in economics is really, for all countries, is the real resources. How can we develop the real resources? How can we use our labor and our resources, you know, to benefit, you know, to the best benefit of our citizens? And that's where the conversation, you know, needs to start in developed country, you know, developed economy countries too. I mean, we have the same, you know, it's a different degree, but we have the same thing. You know, for example, and I'm actually a UK citizen. I live in Ireland, but I'm a UK citizen. We actually have the UK now, you know, the Chancellor talking about, you know, the tax rises and this kind of thing. You know, that the government is borrowing, and that debt will be a burden to, you know, to grandchildren or whatever in the future. And all of that, of course, is a complete lie. It's complete nonsense. You know, the UK government doesn't need to borrow at all. Well, coming back to the developing countries then, and I mean, Indonesia is, for example, you know, that, you know, the focus needs to be again on these real resources. That should be the first step. And I think Fidel Kaboom is talking about this kind of thing. I recall seeing some of what he had to say about the development, I think, of Tunisia a couple of years ago. And that was really, really sort of quite interesting. And I mean, you know, he'd obviously been talking to a lot of people about the real resources situation and about the sort of, you know, the resources that Tunisia, for example, as a country had and could use, you know, if they had a government in place, which is prepared just to spend, you know, in Tunisian's own currency. Obviously, then the issue of sort of then, if you like, then you come to, that's, if you like, is the first technical point. Okay, and I think the second technical point that I think MMT really indicates strongly is that if you need to, you'll need to borrow in a foreign currency really shouldn't be to a greater extent than you need to purchase goods, you know, and real resources denominated in that foreign currency. And I think that we, you know, the economics as a profession internationally probably should be an awful lot clearer about, you know, about when that's going on. You know, what currency is this denominated in? Is it in local currency or is it in foreign currency? I mean, that's a huge difference, obviously, because of, you know, foreign exchange risks, as Abet pointed out there, future foreign exchange risks. I mean, you know, it's nuts to be borrowing that foreign currency unless you really need it. So that's a second sort of technical point. And then, of course, you know, then beyond those considerations, then we come into the real politic of, you know, I mean, let's put a word on it, corruption, you know, between domestic powerful people, corporate interests, and foreign corporate interests, and that's very much the nature of it is. But I think, you know, the key is as it is here, is to sort of try and educate. You know, we need to sort of educate more and more people to understand that, you know, that money isn't the issue in any of this. You know, it is back to the real resources. So just to just a sort of, can I just ask you, are you familiar? Do you follow Robert Hockett?
Me? No, I haven't heard of him. But wait, I've seen one of his books, I believe, being put out in the groups.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, I just think from you in your sort of finance perspective, I think he's a guy that I follow quite a lot, and I've got a little. I don't know if I can. Can I share my screen here? What's there? If I share screen, okay. Right, okay. Let's share. Okay, let's put that up there. Okay, this is just a piece recently by Robert Hockett, and I think this is really quite an interesting piece. It's basically about it's about the sort of the steps that governments really need to take to sort of take control, if you like, of to realize that starting from the point that a currency is a national currency is a sovereign entity, and that really anybody involved in finance and using that currency is doing so under what really amounts to a franchise agreement with that government, no matter what they're doing. And so anyway, Abet, I'd sort of highly recommend you sort of read this piece, and there's a paper linked as well there that I'd strongly recommend for you to have a look at and follow Robert Hockett on this, because I think with your own expertise and experience in finance, I think you'd find that sort of I think you'd find that approach really quite interesting, and he's definitely a guy to follow. He's also this is probably something you probably haven't heard of, but it's he's also interested in central bank digital currencies, and has talked about a thing called an inclusive value ledger currency, which I might be able to find you a link on that if I can find it quickly. Yeah, okay. There's a paper on it here. So yeah, that's this paper. I've sent you a friend request, Abet. Anyway, so if you want any of these links, I can easily sort of give them to you. Well, that again,
you can get them from through. Let's do that through messaging.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So okay. Let me just. How do I get back to? No, hang on. I'm struggling. Oh, Sheen's great. No, stop share. Okay. Yeah, we don't need to share anymore. Okay. Yeah. I think that's probably as much as I've got to say, really. Surya, thanks. For me, it's as much a learning experience to be here with you guys as it is really for me to have anything much I can offer.
So thank you very much, Mike. Glad to hear that you brought Prof. Hockett's name. So I'm going to make the laptop closer to my screen so that you can hear better. Actually, I have interacted probably with all MMT pioneers, MMT experts, to the extent of translating the 600 pages macroeconomics textbook. And we have had Zoom calls with Mosler, Mitchell, Kabuk, of course, and I think those three, yeah? The others are in touch with through emails. So let me show you what my interaction with Prof. Hockett last year. This is last year, yeah? So I hope I can share this, yeah? So I wanted to launch the macroeconomics textbook in Indonesia. So dear Prof. Hockett, I hope you can see this. Let me, I've been following your writings which elaborate Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Hockett is the advisor of the Cortez last year or last 2 years, yeah, to fund of how to fund the Green New Deal in the United States. Blah, 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 yeah. And he said that thankfully Thank you so much. I couldn't be more honored, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And also, recently, I shared his work with another friend who is critical of MMT, Wolfgang Thiel in Germany. And I said that please read Prof. Hockett's work, and Prof. Hockett said thanks. So, yeah, I think thank you for sharing Prof. Hockett's name. I think he is so-called, he is MMT adjacent, you know. He's not part of the inner circle, but he's there enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, would you like to elaborate on? Would you go as far as to say that really the U.S. dollar never leave the U.S. financial system? Would you go as far as saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, although certainly dollar notes, you know, there is an argument you could say that they
Can and
sorry,
do leave. Yeah,
yes,
I mean, the dollar notes can and do live physically. I mean, I was
But
in the
dollar,
States. I took one back here.
but
Yeah,
dollar
yeah.
notes only comprise like less than 1% of the entire dollar in circulation.
Yeah, but I don't really believe that uh, there's really that much value in that. Like saying that the U.S. dollars do not leave the federal system. Um, for me, that's an interesting tidbit, but it really, I'm not sure how that is very material, especially if you're talking about it say from the
Yeah,
developing
I
countries,
agree.
you know.
I agree. I agree with that. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not. I mean, this point just seems to come up where people think, oh, look, these are all offshore dollars or something. You know, they're holding them in offshore accounts, and it's more related to to offshoring of dollar-denominated assets
yeah,
in developed economies.
and
It's not really significant in terms
yeah.
of
It's it's
international
like
development and foreign trade and so
it's
on. It's
like
not. Yeah.
it's like saying that the dollar doesn't leave their accounting ledgers. It will always be there. It's the
So,
same with
Exactly.
Philippine pesos. I think that is really material. It's interesting to know, but I don't know how that is really material. If we want to think about modern money in the fiat sense, such that uh, I just don't see how that is
what
material.
what do you think is the best counter to why post-colonial countries, I like to say post-colonial instead of developing, because Prof. John Kregel said all countries are developing, including industrialized ones. So what do you think is the best argument against why post-colonial countries likes to borrow dollar? You see, in people's mind, ordinary people's mind, borrow means, that the lender gives to the borrower. The borrower have it and can use it in any manner they like. You see, but for the case of the U.S. dollar, you, people think that the U.S. dollar, is being transferred from the U.S. to Indonesia, and Indonesia, the U.S. dollar is being used to pay for this and that. So, if not that statement, what do you think is the best counter to people who say that we need US dollar, to the practice of governments who borrows US dollar? So what is the best counter to ordinary people? What is your alternative?
Well, I think okay. It's not just the US dollar. Okay, when we think about the dominance, when I think about the dominance of the US dollar, it has something to do, of course, with their dominance and the political scene, their military power, and the way that they've dominated basically international finance since World War II. There's a historical reason for that to be the case, but the idea of dollar denominated liabilities being totally counterproductive to the development of developing nations, I think is also a mistake. If we can look at at US dollars as simply as a currency like any other currency, the difference is this currency is the most traded in the world. It's the most accepted in the world for trade. if I go to eBay right now, most of it will be denominated in dollars, and they're going to be much less ways for me to consume if I am going to limit myself in pesos. Having said that, I agree with what Mike said that about the whole trying to develop your real resources thing. Now, I remember the last time we had a talk with Professor Kabub about this, and that was one of the things that I pointed out. One of the things that's stopping, say, nations like the Philippines or Indonesia in developing their own capabilities, their own industries in their own countries that they can do by mobilizing resources in their own borders through their own currency, because people will accept that, is the whole idea of competitive advantage. This is one of those things that are so dominant in economic thought that you simply can't get away from it. It's so orthodox that nobody even, very few actually even try to challenge it. The whole idea, it's been around since the 1700s with David Ricardo. The whole idea that a country is better off importing stuff that they can't produce efficiently, i.e., things that they can produce cheaper than everyone else. For example, one of the things that the Philippines did in the past few months was take away the quantity restrictions for rice. We used to have a protectionist stance for rice, and the Philippines eats a lot of rice. I mean, like Indonesia, that's our staple food. For over decades before, the Philippines has tried to be self-sufficient in rice. So we had these quantity restrictions, which means that we can only import a certain quantity of it, and all of it has to be produced here in order to bolster local production. In the early part of this year, they signed a law taking away the quantity restrictions and putting in tariffs. That means now people can basically import as much rice as they want. Now, the first thing that happened is that the price of rice for our local farmers started falling down. It was at the start of that policy, it was a complete disaster. But the whole idea of that, the theory holding that together, is the Ricardian competitive advantage theory, saying that why should we produce rice when we can buy cheaper rice from, say, Vietnam or Thailand? Now, the idea from the way I look at it is we have to, it would make sense for us to produce rice, even if it means peso for peso, it's more expensive than Vietnam and Thailand, is because we don't need dollars in order to produce rice here. There, we have to use dollars in order to buy from Thailand and Vietnam because they're not going to accept Philippine pesos. So that's one of the things that hamstring things like that when it comes to thinking of why can't we produce these things here? Why do we have to import when it's obvious that a lot of people plant rice here? And that's one of the things about orthodox economics. They have so many of these very dominant thought to the point that they're literally embedded in ideology. It's very hard to shake them off. So the whole idea, no, when I say, okay, part of gaining monetary sovereignty is to question Ricardian competitive advantage. You tell that to anybody in an economics department, and they'll probably chase you off with that's one of the challenges of this kind, basically the heterodox side of economics in general, because what you are dealing with is a lot of things that are very orthodox, things that are very well embedded and are already accepted as basically science. There are lots of ways to challenge this, and actually MMT is one of them. One of the things that should be one of the things that I noticed about MMT as a pursuit in itself is that it looks at macroeconomics as macroeconomics. They're looking at it not from the point of view of individuals, but of a whole society. And that's what macroeconomics is supposed to be. Diba? When you look at it, you look at it from an institutional perspective, from the point of view of a whole nation, and how resources move around. Now, if we look back at traditional neoclassical theories of economy, the main subject of economics is an atomized individual. That is again part of that hegemonic thinking that it's so dominant that when it goes back to the whole Margaret Thatcher thing, and she was right if when she described economic reality as we look at it from neoclassical economics as there's no such thing as society, just individuals and families. That's basically how microeconomics looks at it. They look at how an apparently rational individual who has perfect information, who can optimize, works, multiply that by a million, you have a macroeconomy. That's basically how those theories work. Which is one thing very different with MMT because MMT looks at it from a societal level. Because when you now think about a country, a sovereign nation being able to produce the economy, then it suddenly makes sense why it can't behave in the same way as an individual. That is one of the things that make the whole MMT perspective very different from the traditional economics because basically all traditional economics follow that way of thinking, the atomized individual. And that is how that theory comes about. So an atomized individual has perfect information, has this, has that. He optimizes. And if there are 100 of you, maybe there's a little bit of change. So you have econometrics that says, okay, they're not all predictable. So let's use statistics instead. So now instead of looking at things in terms of certainties, you now look at things in terms of probabilities. But the logic is still basically the same. What I'm saying here with regard to the MMT perspective is that it is actually a genuinely societal way of looking at macroeconomics. It is not simply the aggregation of the individual corporations, individuals, and how they would behave as if they were individuals and just corporations. The whole thing about MT is that there is an instrumentality of society called the state. It can do this, and you have to look at it from the whole societal perspective for that to make sense. Which is why I found it so very attractive in the first place because it is a very different way of looking at things compared to any other way you look at economics. Really, if you look at any economics textbook, you will always go back to that logic. So it's one of the things that have to be, and it's not going to be easy to spread that message out, especially when government policies with regards to economics literally consult academics who perpetuate this discipline. It's not going to be easy.
Okay, thank you, Abet and Mike. Let me strengthen your point, yeah, Abet, yeah, because okay, let me just strengthen your point. You're forgetting a lot of things. I follow Prof. Michael Hudson, who likes classical economists, even Ricardo, because Ricardo doesn't say what you said. Ricardo said, let me show you this, yeah. Ricardo said this, yeah. And a lot, even Adam Smith and all these classical economists, you know, two scholars. First Michael Hudson and then Anwar Shaikh. Yeah. So you see here, this is a paper by Prof. Pavlina Charneva. Yeah, a global Marshall Plan for joblessness. A global. So INET economics, the origin of the paper, naked capitalism was covered there, and we can see here, and this is what you missed. One of the first lessons learned by introductory students in economics and evidently quickly forgotten after graduation is that benefits from trade are reaped in conditions of full employment. So that's what you miss. Ricardian equivalence assume that. It is not automatic, but they assume that. Okay, let me continue, yeah? Here, Prof. Prabhat Patnaik, yeah? Economics and imperialism. My second illustration is to underscore this point related to trade theory, which assiduously propagates that trade among countries always works to the mutual benefit of both. Blah, 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 yeah? How does mainstream theory achieve this feat of demonstrating the virtues of free trade? It does so simply by assuming that all factors of production are fully employed in each economy, both before and after it has been opened up for trade. So, Patnaik, from I think Marx's perspective, go deeper into the criticism, yeah, because Prof. Charneva was not that was not her main point, but her main point was like the Marshall Plan, which is very ingenious by the U.S., you know, creates dollars distributed to the world, and therefore that's why, as you said, Abet, dollar becomes the dominant currency because the U.S. government created it and distributed it by the billions to countries that were affected by World War II. Yeah, so we will be smashed or we will be criticized for not knowing this. So we need to know this. So we do not criticize Ricardo, but we criticize the lack of fullness of interpretation of this theory. And I continue, yeah. If this assumption is granted, then naturally there is no scope for any deindustrialization since the displaced artisans would, by assumption, get reabsorbed in the export sector rather than remaining unemployed or underemployed. So we have to know that free trade, Ricardian equivalence is premised based on full employment before and after. And obviously, this does not hold true, has never hold true.
Well,
Britain only opened up its trade, after it started to industrialize.
mm.
So is
but
the
I have
US.
but I have to contend, especially if we're talking about Ricardian competitive advantage, and I'm only talking about the whole competitive advantage. It's the main reason why there's so much unemployment in the US. The reason why they shipped out their labor to China is because it was cheaper, because China had the competitive advantage for that factor of production. And now that's the whole point. When you apply the whole idea of competitive advantage in its most uh say in that kind of interpretation of it, trying to find that competitive advantage on the basis of this, that is exactly what you will get. Now, for example, again, with that rice thing, it's possible for us to produce rice. Let's assume that we can produce a kilo of rice here for 10 pesos. But if we convert the money to dollars and buy it from Vietnam, they can produce it at 6. That is one of the reasonings why they would rather import than no, and they would say instead of planting rice, plant something else. Now that makes some sense in itself. But then again, now we're going back to economics of being atomized individuals again. The idea is to look at it from a broad, from that broad perspective of society that can't be reduced to individuals because that is what a macroeconomy is. Now, I'm not going to argue whether David Ricardo was totally right or not correct, but I will say that that idea of competitive advantage is one of the most central tenets of neoliberal domination through free trade. The whole idea of free trade is that you buy cheaply for things that you cannot produce competitively, and the things that you and what's left in your place, you try to find something else that you can produce competitively that you can bring to the world market. Now, the point I want to make is that is it really that simple to get something else that you can specialize in and trade in the world market?
Who is disturbing us? Let me remove this person. Yeah. Okay, continue.
Yeah, so
Abet.
so so that's my point. In simple theoretical interpretation of competitive advantage, the idea is that a country should stop producing stuff that they that they can't sell in the world market because it's too expensive for them to produce it in their home country. Instead, they should just import that from another country, produce something else which they can sell to the world market. And when I say they can sell if they can produce it at a cost basically that's competitive in the world. That is the point of Ricardo in saying that trade is good for both. But in practice, is it really that simple? For a country, say like the Philippines, okay, we can't produce rice any better than Vietnam, so we'll have to import some of it. What then are we going to do with the resources? Are we going to plant something? What is it the world wants that we can produce that it will buy at no at a competitive price? The answer to that isn't very simple. And that is one of the things that I believe hamstrings a lot of third world countries, well, developing countries, post-colonial countries, which is why in the end, what the one of the biggest dollar earning resources of the Philippines are people, migrant laborers. That follows precisely with the whole idea of competitive advantage. We can send cheap labor. If you follow that condition to its ultimate logical conclusion, that is how it ends. Now, the idea that it only works equitably if everyone is in full employment, I agree with that. But the whole point is that if before you get there, you are hamstrung with the idea, no, we have to stop doing this. Instead, we have to find a cheaper alternative. We import that, and for the rest, we find something else. Finding that something else, that alternative use for your resources that you can sell to the world market, that isn't very simple. That's a pretty complicated thing right then and there. And we've been trying to solve that by wanting to be an export-oriented industry ever since the 1970s. These questions are very, the thing I'm saying is that these questions are questions of macroeconomics. They're societal questions. These things cannot be solved by saying, okay, if only an individual will do this. And no, this is an institutional thing that deserves an institutional approach.
Thank, thank you very much. I agree with you. It seems that we are talking at two levels here. First, at the level of competitive advantage. Second, at the level of the deeper underlying theoretical arguments. Yeah, and here, Klein and Pettis, they just released this book this year, I think, recently, and they said that, as you also said, you know, institutions, yes, but there are individuals behind institutions who make decisions at the expense of workers and ordinary people. Yeah, so we have a very tough challenge ahead of us. And I would like to show also here, this is Professor Jomo, yeah. I am in his mailing list, Stop Blaming Industrial Policy. So he makes the same point as you. If you can see here, there's a lot of competitive, you know, creating our own industry is deemed uncompetitive. So that's why we don't have our own cars. Does Philippines have their own cars?
No.
How about phones?
Yeah, but it really isn't that sellable in the market.
I see. That's why, you know, because it is not deemed competitive, you know, in our own country. That's why we do not produce it. So yeah, you're right. But I was talking just now at a more deeper level. But never mind, it's fine. We are at the same road, just different lane. So Mike, do you have anything to add to what Abet and I were discussing?
Yeah. Am I? Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, you can. Okay, sorry. Yeah. I mean, it is pretty complicated, isn't it? I mean, if you just, you know, how long has the World Trade Organization been taking to agree anything? I mean, for God's sake, I mean, you know, free trade was that simple. I mean, what are they doing, spending, you know, 20 years trying to reach, you know, with all the horse trading? I mean, for God's sake, you know, I mean, so real terms of trade is, you know, is the bottom line in the whole game. So you know, it's not at all, and I agree with Abet, you know, that it's sort of, you know, we're talking about institutional issues here, you know, with, you know, things like the, you know, international institutions like WTO and so on, which, I mean, you know, so you know, yeah, it's not going to get solved tomorrow, is it? But there's something I just want to point out here is that you know, alongside the job guarantee, which is, you know, a core element of MMT from a point of view of just macroeconomic efficiency, if you like. You know, employ all your real resources. It's not that complicated, really, and it's an automatic stabilizer, as we know, and so on. But also alongside that, you know, is the concept of development of your labour resource. You know, with sort of, you know, full lifelong education. And it strikes me, I would be interested to hear your views, Abet, you know, but it strikes me that's really a core, you know, part of where, you know, maybe you could, you know, really heavily direct a job guarantee program towards, you know, developing educational resource, you know, developing your educational resources in countries so that, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm making an assumption here, but I think it might be correct that if you look back at the sort of history of the Industrial Revolution, I mean, one of the things that, I mean, the likes of the British Empire, got lucky because they had loads of coal. But alongside that, they actually had, a fairly sort of, they picked up the educational development thing pretty quickly as well. And I can't help thinking that was a sort of a major factor alongside that. Those advantages at the time in the 17th, 18th centuries, 18th to 19th centuries, sorry. So, that I think is something that, presumably, you could do and wouldn't require massive, imports of, dollar denominated.
Not at all, because that will require basically just labor. A lot of it. One of the things that's very weak actually here in the Philippines, and I don't know about the case in Indonesia, are basically our public services themselves. Our Department of Education is one of, probably, if we can compare it to our neighbors, one of the most poorly funded of the anywhere near in Southeast Asia. I think probably even it's one of the least funded things. I think that also includes health. Well, I mean, a job guarantee, especially for education, even if we just focus on education, can be a real game changer because it can employ a lot of people. You don't need a lot of foreign exchange resources to get it through, and we have plentiful citizens in order to carry it out. That's one of the things that, among others. Another thing is for that whole thing about farming. Why can't government simply take a lot of the urban poor, settle them back in the countryside, and help them get employed in farming activities? A job guarantee can be used for things like that. I mean, the job guarantee isn't just for traditional urban employment. There's potentially a lot of flexibility where it can be applied, because the economic nature of any country is very stratified. It's very differentiated. There are lots of places. One thing for sure is that there are lots of things that need to be done, and there are lots of people who can do them. The whole thing about MMT is that it posits that it is possible to mobilize these people in order to get these things done, and everybody is better off for it. Then that the constraint of the state isn't in the amount of money it has, but how much of these real resources out there can be motivated to action. And yeah, and I agree with that. And there are many ways the job guarantee can serve that public purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it comes back to political will, doesn't it? Which you must obviously know yourself. That we have a big enough. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
But it's not just the politics. Like I said about that whole thing about orthodox economics, the power of those theories is very, very apparent. These things are not just in economic textbooks being talked about by professors and students in universities. These things are the backbone of a lot of economic decisions.
Yes, I see.
So,
yes, I see. Sorry. Yes,
so other than
I mentioned a different way. Sorry, I was going to go on and say I mentioned a different way.
Yeah.
In terms of actually getting this kind of these ideas, I mean, the basics of MMT we both know are very, very simple. I mean, money is this human construct, and hey, it can be made to fit the real. There's a revelation for you. No, so the point is the difficulty is I'm talking about a political difficulty in getting this across to educating citizens. That's the point I'm making. And I mean,
very difficult.
We have this difficulty, but I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that given the existing levels of education, and I'm saying that perhaps a little bit tongue in cheek in terms of first world countries at the moment, because I mean, we got to look at some of the people we elect, but in general terms, there's an educational standard here, and if we can get that across, and I think we're kind of we are making progress.
Yeah.
And I think I always say to people in the MMT sphere, even while we all get a bit depressed about this, about getting this to become mainstream, properly mainstream, and so we can kick out the neoclassicals out of the discourse, out of the conversation, disgrace them, because I think that's what we need to do. I mean, that's what, if we're going to have a world that continues, that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'd just like to say that I think that, once that starts to tip, that process starts to tip over, in first world countries. I'm sorry, I might not be using the best terms here, but developed economies. Once that starts to tip in some of these, it's really going to snowball.
Yeah.
Certainly in developed countries, it's going to snowball. Yeah. And I think that once that, then it's only a matter of time before other countries in the world, post-colonial countries, if you like, sorry, Surya, before they'll pick up on this, and even our own politicians, Western politicians on the left, such as they are, and will pick up on this and say, because I mean, the real left in our countries, it is a very internationalist in outlook. And we will be, if it's anything to do with people like me, I will be pointing out, hang on a minute, we've got a bit of a debt here that we owe to a lot of countries in the world, and I mean, there's a wonderful project in the offing of transferring sustainable technologies, across the world, because that's we're going to, if we're going to develop it here, then sure as hell we can help other people develop it, and we should do that. We need to do it too.
And it's actually getting higher up in the mainstream in the West. I mean, Sanders didn't make it, but it did expose the word to the likes of Kelton and all of that. It's getting there. Like I said, I'm a graduate student, and actually, my plan for my final dissertation will probably be a few years away. Has something to do with MMT. That's for sure. It's basically one of the main reasons why I went back to graduate school in the first place. But that's going to be some of the troubles that I'm having, because when I'm talking to teachers here, never heard of it. The whole idea is pretty well. It's out there. It's not really that well known. Well, for me, I think of that as an opportunity, but it's a good thing that it's getting out in the West, at least. And though people will say that the whole idea of the West leading everything is the whole modernization theory, imperialism, I don't really see it that way. What's important is for the ideas to start getting out there. It has to get out there, because if it can be shown that it can at least challenge the dominant at equal footing, those in the dominant circles, even just in the West, it will drive attention towards intellectuals everywhere to think about it. Maybe what we have always been convinced, maybe it isn't the case, and that's the way how science progresses anyway.
Yeah. I mean, although I would say I don't think there's going to be any, there isn't going to be any state of coexistence in the future in terms of in academia. I mean, neoclassical's got to be gone in terms of macroeconomics. I mean, because if MMT wins, MMT, becomes that widespread. That's the only result, and that's fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean, we all.
And that's one of the things about MMT. It literally is almost a counter revolution to the status quo. That is what it is. And to say that, is it possible to continue all these other neoliberal policies with MMT? It wouldn't make sense under an MMT framework, and that's the whole point.
Yeah. Okay.
Excellent points. I would just like to close our session here. It's 7:09 with, as always, let me share my screen here. Actually proving your points, Here, sorry, this one. This is an article by Prof. Asad Zaman, actually making Abet's point and your point, Mike. The Battle for the Control of Money, published in Journal of King Abdulaziz University, Islamic Economics, 2016. Yeah. So here he says that the World Bank publication, East Asian Miracle, analyzes in detail the strategies used by the East Asian countries to achieve their miraculous growth. One, big industrial conglomerates which work with the help of the government. Two, business-friendly government policies. Three, government-led growth models. Four, government control of money. Five, high investment in social welfare. Now this is where it gets interesting. To ensure that no one else can replicate the East Asian miracle, all of these steps have been prohibited by international law. So this is a big claim. This is a big claim, but Prof. Asad Zaman is he's quite a mainstream person. He's also like Prof. Hocket, an MMT adjacent person. You know, he has very advanced degrees in maths, in statistics, in macroeconomics, yeah. And he headed the, I think he stepped down last year or this year, the Pakistan Institute for Development Economics, yeah, PIDE. So most countries have signed the WTO articles which prohibit industrial policy. So that's your point, Mike, about WTO. IMF ensures that governments cut social welfare to balance budgets, follow tight fiscal policies when there is rampant unemployment, and maintain strict separation from the private sector. Recently, you know, there is an organization in France, I think, they said that the IMF is playing the same playbook, using the same playbook. You know, they are advising countries to cut social welfare later, you know, in a few years from now, to repay their debt and all that. Yeah. And furthermore, central banks have been persuaded to stop targeting. Okay. So this is in 2016. Yeah. And last but not least, a little bit of positive hope. Abet, you mentioned utilizing or fully employing the urban poor. This is our proposal to the candidates of the Medan local election. Basically, it just means Medan without unemployment. And here we say that, and this is also to continue your point, Mike, here we said that the jobs, among the jobs, let me enlarge this here. Among the jobs, let me just translate quickly what are shown here. So this is, so urban unemployed are going to be working in this area. Food sufficiency, energy sufficiency, water sufficiency, education, yeah, health, arts, and environment. You know, and I bet we have the same problem. You know, in our cities, in our regencies, in our provinces, the central government are not providing the appropriate amount of currency, yeah, to engage or to fully employ resources in this local or provincial level. And we are actually advising these political candidates to create complementary currency, you know, and we don't call it currency, we just call it coupon, work coupons, you know. And the initial funding, of course, is through the national currency, but that's only one time, you know. So we are funding these unemployed for the first time, but not their salary, yeah? Just the raw materials, the renovation and all that in national currency. But after that, we are asking them, you know, to grow their own food, to produce energy, to maintain water system, you know, to educate, to health and all that. And here it is said that the job guarantee participant would be the first and foremost people to consume their own production, and any surplus then can be used to help others. So we are hoping to create a positive cycle in which unemployed real resources in terms of buildings, the city government owns a lot of buildings, they own a lot of land, they own a lot of tools, and they have, in Medan, we have a lot of unemployed. So we bring this two together and we fund for the first time with national currency, but not for salary, yeah, just to get the program going. And then after that, we ask them to produce food, energy, and all that, and ask them to consume it using the what do you call that, work coupons, yeah. And this is going to be organized because we have the problem of corruption, we have the problem of institution. So I propose a new, totally new institution which can compose of existing representatives from local governments, even external observers such as you, Mike, such as you, Abet, yeah, and also from mass organization. But the leader, the head, must be the elites of this new institution that manage the job guarantee must be people first and foremost who understand semantic, who understands job guarantee, and who are proven to be incorruptible. I guess that's my concluding words. So I will give 1 or 2 minutes to each of you to conclude your presentation. So over to you first perhaps Mike, and then last but not least, Abet. Please, Mike.
Well, yeah, I mean, not a lot to say really. I think we sort of talked around a lot of the a lot of the core issues really. And I just say, thanks very much to Abet for his input in this. I for one, thanks.
Abet, on to you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I know it was short notice because as Surya knows, this this computer crashed last week and I lost everything. So it's a good thing that I got it back just this week, and most of my files that I used for this presentation, I found it again. So, well, in any case, well, thank you very much for listening, and hope that we can get more engagements next time, especially in the application of these sets of ideas. Here in the developing nations where they seem to like on the thought of it, it's not a not very conducive when you think about it, but it can the ideas there are some of the a lot of those ideas are so fundamental in its nature that you can apply them. Of course, there will be modifications, just as any economy is different from any other. But ideally, I believe that there is a very good future if we can apply these things in this part of the world.
Thank you very much, Abet. Thank you, Mike. Thank
Thank you.
you, Reggie. Unggul. Okay, thank you. Thank you, April. And I guess thank you, Pak Zulkarnain Lubis, for joining us so late. We hope to see you in our next webinars. Bye.